Hey, what's up? This is Twisted Mind, and you're watching the First Look series, an overview of the changes made to your class going into the Mists of Pandaria. Warriors of all specs can bring the Commanding Shout buff, which will increase the health of all raid members by 10%, or they can choose to bring their Battle Shout, which will increase the raid members' attack power by 10%. Warriors of all specs can also bring the Weakened Blows debuff, but this should be brought along to the raid by the tanks. And warriors can also bring the Weakened Armor debuff through their Sunders, which you can glyph to be free of cost. As you'll notice, it has a rage cost. And DPS warriors can bring the Physical Vulnerability through their Colossus Smash. There's some crazy stuff happening in the world of stances. Your battle stance now will only generate rage from white hits at a much increased rate comparatively. However, if you flip on your Berserker stance, you'll generate rage from white hits at a less of a rate, but you will generate more rage because if you're taking damage, you'll also generate rage. So doing good DPS, it means knowing when you're taking damage, and then if you're in defensive stance, your rage generation is crippled because it's at a fixed rate unless you're tanking. But I'll get to that in the prot section, and you also take less damage taken and have the increased threat modifier. Also note that there's still a lot of experimentation going on with this in beta, and it is subject to change. For your core abilities, you'll notice Recklessness no longer increases the damage you take, so you can use it in prot. And also notice that Deadly Calm is now given to all warriors as a baseline, and it's on a 1-minute cooldown, but it doesn't give free heroic strikes, and it's only for the next 3. Charge is now a 20-second cooldown, and you can finagle with it in the first tier of talents, and there's no intercept anymore. And your heroic leap is now on a 45-second cooldown, but you can actually get this down to 30 and do double damage with a glyph. The stacking Executioner debuff is gone, and Execute is now a proper Execute, but note that it now costs 30 rage. I forgot to say when I was talking about stances that you can now cast any ability in any stance. You no longer take damage with Berserker Rage, and your heroic throw is now down to a 30-second cooldown, and anybody can get Gag Order from a glyph. Intimidating Shout for now is down to a 1-minute cooldown, and you can glyph to tremble in place still, and Disarm is now available to everyone regardless of the stance, and it's on a 1-minute cooldown like it was previously. There's also something being changed around with how Enrage works for all specs. You can use this Berserker Rage to do it on command, but essentially without it, you need to hit one of these primary abilities or critical block in order to be enraged. It's a flat 10% physical damage boost, and it also generates 10 rage now every time you go into an enrage. Dumping that rage will be easy, as notice these two abilities that were off the global cooldown are now on a 1.5 second on their own cooldown, and they cost 30 rage apiece. And also note that they scale with weapon damage now. Also note that Rend has been taken out and it's just been added to this Deep Wounds passive that all warriors have, so it should be easy to keep a 100% uptime with this. And also note that this can be spread around to everyone if you drop a Thunderclap with the Blood and Thunder passive that's also baseline for all warriors. Pummel's up to a 15-second cooldown, costs no rage, and can be glyphed with Root Interruption. Arms is still the premier two-handed spec, and saw a few rotation tweaks going forward. For AoE cleaving, you still get Sweeping Stripes when you spec it. It costs 30 rage, but note you can have 100% uptime theoretically with it. Warriors lost Retaliation, but Die by Sword. The Fury ability is now on an Activate 2-minute cooldown, and it's a nice alternative to Shield Wall, which still requires a shield. Although you can't just space out in PvP in order to get the 100% parry, you need to face your target. Arm still gets Colossus Smash. You still want to work your rotation into a series of button presses after you use it. It's on a 20-second cooldown, but Sudden Doom still exists, so you can get it off cooldown sooner. Mortal Strike is the bread of this spec. Note that it's on a 6-second cooldown. You want to be using it as close to that 6-second cooldown as possible. And all 3 of these abilities I'm talking about right here, none of them actually cost rage. They all generate it. And then Overpower is the butter of this spec. It still procs when someone dodges an attack, but it also procs now after every single mortal strike, and then here's the randomness of it. If you use one overpower, it has a chance to proc another overpower, and that proc can proc on itself again and again and again. You can randomly, if you get really lucky, get it up to 5 stacks. And note with overpower's increased chance to crit, it can soup up your rage pretty quickly. You can either dump this rage with Slam for a single target, or Whirlwind for AoE, and note that all of these are all sharing the same global cooldown. Also, in addition to this, you can dump your rage using Heroic Strike and Cleave, which is off that global cooldown and can be used over top of one of these other 2 rage dumps. Also, when a target is in execute range, execute does take place of the slam in your rotation, costs the same rage, does the same thing, more damage. So you can already see how you need to adjust your rotation pretty crazily if you have anything that you can cleave or any AoE. Now more about that taste for blood talent. Essentially, if you get lucky with your overpowers, you can proc that stacking up to 5 times, taste for blood talent, enough times that Mortal Strike comes back off cooldown, and you can proc Mortal Strike again and maybe get more additional procs, and then you dump those procs into either a roided out Heroic Strike or a roided out Cleave. So the rotation essentially plays like it did in the previous expansion, although now you're juggling these random procs from your overpowers, and it's kind of like you're waiting and seeing if you can get that extra proc for that extra damage off of that next Heroic Strike while trying not to cap your rage. It feels kind of random, but when those bursts line up, man, do they really line up. So this can lead to some interesting decisions with pooling your rage, because if you can line up all of that lucky burst with the Colossus Smash, you're going to be a monster. So this and the new stance dancing adds quite a skill cap. Also, rage is still semi-tied to crit with your abilities, so crit is still squarely top at our #1 priority after expertise. And also note that rage generation is still kind of like a little bit in flux, so there are some tricks and workarounds to it. If you do get unlucky instead of lucky with your randomness of these taste for blood procs, there will be a little bit of a dead time in your rotation. What you can do with this dead time is you can leap out with your now really shortened cooldown heroic leap and then charge back into combat, or intervene back into someone who's outside of a certain range and then charge back in and then instantly get a crap ton of rage with these two glyphs. Fury is tricky now because it's the only warrior spec that can actually dual wield. Both single-minded Fury and Titan's Grip are now baked into the spec, so you can pick either or at any time. That silly die by the sword cooldown also is learned soon as you spec. You still get Colossus Smash in the spec, same rules apply as last expansion, try to line up as much after it as you can. And you also get Bloodthirst, something you should be familiar with. You want to be using Bloodthirst as close to cooldown as possible because its crits are what give you the Raging Blow in Rage, something that it now stacks to 2 charges, but essentially what that means is if you just blew your Berserker Rage, you can still get that additional charge from when you get a Bloodthirst proc. Colossus Smash and Bloodthirst generate rage. Raging Blow has a really small rage cost, so it's almost negligible, and then you can choose to dump them with either this new Wild Strike ability, which is instant, it's kind of like Slam was for arms, fills the same place in the rotation, or Whirlwind if there's AoE, or if something is in execute range, you use execute. And note, just like arms, all 6 of these abilities all share the same global cooldown. If you want to dump rage off the global cooldown, you still have access to Heroic Strike and Cleave. The rotation is a little bit different from previous. Colossus Smash is still up at the very top, and you still want to try to maximize your Raging Blows, which includes using Berserker Rage if necessary. Although dumping it with your Wild Strike is filling the same place as Slam, your Bloodthirst procs now do something a little bit different. They still give you the pseudo same effect of an instant free Slam cost, which is now called Wild Strike, but it actually gives you 3 in a row, which can perfectly fill up between your Bloodthirst, so working it into your rotation means eyeballing where you are rage-wise and trying not to rage cap while dumping all 3 of these Bloodthirst procs. You still want to shout for rage, and you also still want to use Heroic Strike in with your rotation anytime you're getting close to cap, about 60 to 70-ish. Also, for single-minded Fury, what this means is Raging Blow is also still above your Wild Strike no matter what in your rotation, so that's different from last expansion. Your AoE rotation should feel familiar, however note now that the Meat Cleaver ability is now only procced off of Whirlwinds, and also it still stacks to 3 times, but it increases your Raging Blow target numbering next time you use it. So it becomes a little mini game to see judging how many targets you're about to hit, when to dump your Raging Blow, because if there's 2 you only want to let it stack once, but if there's 3 you want to stack it to 2 times and then use it, and if there's 4 or more you want to get it up to 3 times before you dump your Raging Blow. And your Raging Blow has some synergy with this glyph that I would highly recommend you take in this rotation. Prot is now essentially really mandatorily tied to a shield because the only rage generating abilities you have are tied to shields, and because your rage generation is really low in defensive stance, you're pretty much tied to your critical blocks as well. You want to try to maximize your Shield Slam, 6-second cooldown still, only it generates rage now, and you also want to maximize your Revenge, which is now on a fixed cooldown of 9 seconds, and it also generates rage, but it can reset when you dodge or parry. Shield Slam is still the priority here. Your Devastate and Thunderclap debuff the target, but note that none of these abilities actually generate rage, so really you want to be using Devastate to try to proc more shield slams from your sword and board, which is still in the game. Now here's where it gets tricky. The new active mitigation system and your rage dumps are found with these two abilities. Shield Barrier needs a base minimum 20 rage to use, however it can use up to 60, so if you have 60 rage it'll dump it all and put up this absorb shield that scales with how much rage you just use, and it absorbs all damage, so it's usually the magical buffer that you want to put up. And then your shield block is also now on a workaround. It's a 6-second cooldown and the recharge time is 9 seconds, so you can't have a theoretical 100% increase to uptime with this now. So being a good prop warrior is knowing when to use this and when to pair it together, like for the double charges, which you now recharge only up to 2. You can alternatively also dump your rage with your heroic strikes, cleaves, and executes, but since rage is tied to active mitigation, it's not such a good idea, but there is a passive in the game called Ultimatum that you want to be watching for in order to dump your heroic striker cleaves because they're free. In the priority, this falls beneath both of your rage generating abilities and your active mitigation abilities though. And a note on your mastery and critical blocks, they're now on a separate role from your dodge parry, so you can't effectively avoidance cap like you could in previous expansions. It's on a separate role and it should be treated sort of like dodge and parry but with more value because your crit blocks are tied to your enrage. So your new skill cap is knowing exactly when you want to blow your shield block, and yeah, you do want to use shield block over your shield barrier. I know that the absorb shield sounds enticing, but keep in mind that your shield block is causing those crit blocks, which is generating more rage back, so you'll rage starve yourself if you're just always using shield barrier. However, note that shield barrier does scale with attack power, so maybe we'll see something changing up in the higher eye levels, but for now you want to try to maximize that shield block uptime, and since it recharges at a rate of 9, you can theoretically get about 3 in a row if you're timing it correctly and you're generating enough rage to have that 18-second uptime, but you also need to let those recharge at an acceptable rate too, so you need to weave those into your rotation and you need to use them intelligently now. Note that they're both off the global cooldown, so you still want to be doing your rotation of shield slams and revenges and trying to maximize more shield slams to get that max rage income. And remember to keep the target debuffed with your thunderclap every so often. A lot of the old prot talents that weren't just turned into passives or something you learn when you skill the tree are now glyphs, so give the major glyphs a look over on a popular website. And for the new talent tree, technically you want all the talents that can give a stun. However, don't discredit some of these other new talents that could theoretically gain rage, because rage is tied to your active mitigation, and some of the ones that don't cause stuns in the same tier, there's some really cool utility that you could provide by taking them, so it's going to depend on the encounter which ones you choose. The abilities we have to look forward to at 87 is these new banners. Note that all of these banners can be placed in such a way that you can intervene them, so look for creative ways of using that. Basically what they do, one can reduce the damage that all enemies are doing within a certain AoE. One is an AoE taunt, which is really good, keep in mind, because abilities like Challenging Shout or Challenging Roar have been taken out. Or you can provide some utility with your raid by giving them extra critical strike damage. That's damage on the crits that you're giving when you place this banner, Skull Banner. If you like this vid or others on my site, you can help support me by liking, favoriting, subscribing, and even commenting. I'll try to respond best I can. And thanks for all the support, guys. I really do appreciate it.